So thank you all for joining us today for this important conversation on AI safety. And you may be wondering, like, why are we talking about AI safety at Black Hat? Isn't Black Hat a security conference? And I think what we wanted to do on the forward focus track is kind of highlight some things that security professionals, may need to be prepared for in the future, and in the very near future in many cases. And AI safety is one of those topics. So we've seen this happen in many other spaces where things kind of creep into the security domain because of the skills that security professionals have. And part of the problem with AI safety, if you've followed any AI safety conversations on any social media, is that AI safety is often associated with existential risk scenarios. So how many people have ever heard about people talking about bombing data centers to stop AI? So it's actually, AI safety sometimes has a bit of a PR problem when it comes to these things. So we wanted to bring you this session to think about safety. And I think if we think about safety in terms of safe to use, right, security starts to become more of the conversation. So when I looked for a way to define safety of like a personal AI, like things that you would be using on a daily basis, the simplest way that I came up with to define safety and safe to use was something called SPAR. And the S stands for security. So it's security, privacy, alignment, and reliability, those types of things. So hopefully you get some information you can take from this session to go back to work and help define, take the first steps for both AI safety and security. So welcome to the session. My name is Nathan Hamill. I am Senior Director of Research at a company called Kudelski Security, where I lead the fundamental and applied research team. We focus on the security of emerging technologies, of which AI is one of them. But where you probably know me from here is I am the AI, machine learning, and data science track lead for Black Hat. So I've been on the review board for many years now, and happy to bring you this session with these very smart people. So I won't even do people's intro justice. So I'm going to let them introduce themselves, and then we will get going with this conversation. So Nikki, do you want to start?
Hi, my name's Nikki Pope. I'm the head of AI and legal ethics at NVIDIA. I am a lawyer. I'm not an engineer. I do tell people, though, in high school, I took a course in Fortran. And so that's about the extent of my coding ability. I am the person who's responsible for integrating requirements into our product development process that will help us meet our objectives for trustworthy AI, which is what we call it. And also to comply with pending regulations. You probably all know that the EU AI Act is going to go into effect next year, part of it anyway. So we're making sure that we have AI governance systems in place and things like that in order to be able to comply with those laws and answer questions that regulators and others might have.
Great.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mikhail, and I'm a research scientist at Google DeepMind. And there I help lead our AI red team and focus predominantly on security and privacy as it pertains to AI systems.
Great.
Hi, I'm Amanda Minnick. I'm on the AI red team at Microsoft, and I have been working on that team as an operator and researcher for the past 3 years. So on a day-to-day basis, I'm trying to attack our Gen AI models and our AI applications like Copilot so that they're safer and more secure for the end user. And before I was at Microsoft, I was at Twitter, where I was focused on the trust and safety kind of space. I was looking at information operations around the world and election interference. Also domestically, this was during COVID, so COVID misinformation, QAnon, lots of things like that. I applied unsupervised methods to try to action at scale on some of these problems. So the AI safety space is near and dear to my heart. And my background before that is PhD in CS ML person. So that's where I'm approaching this problem from.
Great. Well, thank you very much. And thank you all for agreeing to share your expertise with us. So let's dive right in. Let's start with, so I mentioned that AI safety has a bit of a PR problem. And one of those is that it's often associated with existential risk. So if you don't know what existential risk is, it's the fear that AI will destroy humanity and probability of doom or P-doom. I think the downside of this is if you don't believe in that, then you kind of think that AI safety isn't that big of a problem, right? So we have a little bit of an issue there. So how do you think of AI safety, and what are some of the real-world risks of not getting it right? Let's start with you, Nikki.
Sure. I'm glad you asked me the existential risk question because I do believe that there is existential risk, but not of Terminator or Skynet or whatever, Cyberdyne. What I do believe is different groups of people can be adversely affected in their regular lives by AI. And that for them could be an existential risk. So for instance, if you are a single mother and you're trying to get a mortgage loan and the financial services company that you're working with or that you apply for your loan with has a biased algorithm that discriminates against single mothers, that is a problem for you. And those are the issues that when I think of AI safety, those are the kinds of things that we want to make sure we get, that we test for and try and mitigate in our AI models. And it could be anything from financial services to healthcare. You know, if you, I mean, that's a real existential risk. So if you're getting, if an AI is making a recommendation on a surgical procedure or prescription medication and it gets it wrong because there's some sort of bias to the group that you are part of, that could maybe kill you. So that is an existential risk. So I want us to continue to talk about existential risks, but I want to talk about them as they relate to real people today now with the problems that they have and the ways that people are currently using AI.
Great. That's an excellent summary. Mikhail, anything to add?
Yeah, maybe just to add, I really like the way, Nikki, you framed that. I think it's, for this topic, and because it's so fraught, I think it's useful to kind of ground the conversation. And what I typically view it through is more of a kind of a threat models, kind of threat/risk models, and particularly trying to like really ground it in a kind of like a set of kind of a likelihood and severity matrix, right? So, you know, it's also important to kind of unpack that topic of AI safety because it's so broad. So it's important to kind of distinguish the sort of things that are unintentional, and like Nikki was just talking about. But then you also have like intentional harms, and those themselves can be kind of decomposed in that you have things like, a lot of those fall into different food groups. Things like misuse, right? Think about, you know, okay, a model that's really capable at certain, say, like cybersecurity capabilities, how might that be misused? And then there's kind of the whole other kind of more maybe future-looking problems, which is things like misalignment, right? So I think important is to both kind of ground the conversation in specific threat models and kind of to narrow in what part of the problem are you talking about, because otherwise it becomes very fuzzy and confusing.
Sure. Amanda, anything to add?
I think they covered it pretty well. I liked
it's tough to go third after people cover it.
It was pretty much, our team does look at both perspectives that you're discussing, so I like that you highlighted both, but yeah, I think it was great.
All right, well, great. We'll move on to the next. So we kind of discussed like what the problems are. So next question is, whose problem is AI safety? So I think many companies may consider that, you know, AI safety is important, but important for somebody else. So maybe it's important for governments to create regulations, or maybe it's important only for companies training foundation models. Like that's their problem. We just use an API and make calls, and it's not our problem. So, you know, maybe they feel that, you know, training foundation models, things like that. So whose responsibility is it? And of course, what is the makeup of an AI safety team? Like, what are the roles involved? So, Mikhail, you want to start?
Oh, me? Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think just like in cybersecurity, AI safety is a team sport. So basically, this idea that it's just the sole responsibility of one group it doesn't really cut it. So whether you're a model developer and you're trying to think about how the downstream applications of this might affect people, but then that doesn't mean that even if you're not developing models yourselves, but you're a user, there's kind of I think kind of levels of maturity when it comes to awareness of the different aspects involved in AI safety. And at the minimum, I think starting with awareness, right? The fact that this technology is super exciting, but at the same time understanding that there are risks and potential threats that come along with it. So at the minimum, I would encourage people, any organization, even if you're just considering this, I think that level, the awareness level. And then there's kind of a more proactive engagement, right? Whether you're, say, if you're someone who's just kind of a downstream user of an AI model, if you're just downloading it from, say, like Hugging Face, knowing that there's a lot of problems that could go along with that. So I think that at every kind of phase of this, there's some responsibility. And even the people who are going to be using models are not even involved in the development, being aware of a savvy consumer of this. I think it's like people are very familiar now that these models can hallucinate things. I think we're going to see this kind of growing awareness of some of the limitations that come with these, and it's for everyone to participate. And in particular, I guess the last thing I'll say, I think in the security side of things, this community here, I feel like there's a tremendous role that you can all play, because some of these problems in AI safety are things that we've seen in cybersecurity for decades, and it'd be important for this community to weigh in.
Great. Amanda, anything to add?
Yeah, at Microsoft, we're obviously consumers of OpenAI foundation models, and so we think about this problem a lot. We're not able to interrogate the model and look at the weights and really, or like design it from scratch in ways that, would hopefully be kind of safe by design. So we still feel quite a responsibility that our products that use these models should be safe for the end user, and that it should be not a negative, harmful, abusive, biased experience to use these products. And I think that everyone has something to contribute to this space, from policy, legal, engineering, research, like linguistics. There's so many aspects to this problem. It's very broad. Like Nathan said, we put a big umbrella over this area. And so I think that I would hope that we can all kind of think about how can we contribute to making these technologies safer as we push them into so many areas of our lives.
Great. Nikki, anything to add to that?
I would also look at the use case for the model. So, for instance, if you have a chemistry or biology model that generates proteins or formulas, it's one thing to test that model and sort of shore it up or put up guardrails for not allowing certain kinds of prompts or not allowing certain output. But even that isn't enough, because if you're talking about a bad actor, they might be trying to create a chemical weapon. And so the responsibility goes way down the line. It starts with the people who are building and designing the model, but it continues on to the people who are deploying the model, the companies that deploy the models, companies that sell chemicals and equipment and manufacturing processes. So this idea of responsibility, when we say everybody, we mean everybody in the supply chain that goes from the idea to the execution of the idea. And all of those folks along the way should be involved in the protection of us from the rest of us.
That's such a great point. And the use case point is foundational to security as well, not just safety, because what is the cost of failure of any particular use case? So that's great. And since you mentioned guardrails, so I'm gonna move on to my next question. So I mentioned that AI safety has a bit of a PR problem. And part of that problem stems from things like guardrails, right? So guardrails are kind of the public face of AI safety. So sorry, but as a language model, I can't do that. And sometimes you're asking for legitimate things. We all know that guardrails, in many cases, can be easily bypassed. And there's also a push for like post-training alignment for models. So those seem to be like two of the big, controls that are put in place. So I guess, Amanda, so are guardrails in post-training effective AI safety controls? And if not, what should we be doing instead? Or if they are, what should we be doing in addition to those?
Yeah, I like that question. I mean, I feel like they can be somewhat effective. We use them in all of these LLM applications, and they do help. I think things would look really different if we didn't have them. My feeling is that they can be easily circumvented. Classifiers can quickly grow stale. And the post-safety training that we do to try to make these models safer can be undone by fine-tuning if we allow fine-tuning access to the model very quickly and inexpensively. So sometimes it does feel like we're doing all of this additional stuff, but as soon as we allow more access, these are not going to protect us anymore. So I feel that we should focus on shifting left and getting back to the data focus, and rather than having these huge corpora of data that we throw everything in and then we try to pull the bad stuff out, we're much more thoughtful about what we include so that the model doesn't learn about these harms. It doesn't necessarily learn about really horrific like hate speech and like sexual acts and all these things that we then have to manually go through the results and then slap this stuff on to try to prevent it. I think that there's a real opportunity for us to learn from the lessons of data science and data engineering and statistics and like bring that in and have like regulations and compliance about that part. And I think that our overall models and our AI applications would be much safer and more secure as well. So that's my perspective.
Nikki, anything to add?
I read a paper maybe 6 or 7 months ago of, I can't remember if it's Stanford or MIT, but training a model to recognize the bad stuff. The same way, like when you were a kid and you put your hand on the hot stove and your parents said, well, you won't do that again, because you learned not to do that because you learned that that was not a thing to do. And so, I'm not a data scientist, I'm not an engineer, but it would seem to me that if we could teach models, if we can, the same way we train models to recognize patterns in language, we should be able to train models to recognize things that we don't want them to do. So again, it happens earlier in the process, and maybe that would, shore up models in order to perform better. So if a guardrail doesn't work, maybe that doesn't matter because the model has learned what not to do and what not to say and what not to output or not say. Models don't speak.
Great. Mikhail, anything to add?
Yeah, I think this area is interesting in the sense that it's a problem that I think a lot of us, in this community have faced before, which is this kind of tension between utility and safety, right? So I think this is something that, if anything, this community is really well versed in. And I think that there is no like one solution, and instead you're going to have people who have different needs, right, to live in that different spectrum. Some people might want a model that is more permissive to maybe explore things like, I want to use it as a kind of a companion red teamer, so I want it to be able to identify and exploit vulnerabilities, say, in a system. So I think understanding that it's more of this continuum, and then the other thing that I'll say is, I think there's already kind of this kind of interesting Cambrian explosion of solutions that, it's not like it's up for a handful of companies to like impose like, here's the system and here's the guardrails that you must all use. I think there's kind of a lot of offerings that are popping up, and people just need to understand where they live in that kind of trade space.
If I could.
Go ahead.
It's interesting you say that because I think about models in terms of who's going to use them, what they're going to use them for. And so if a company is going to create a chatbot from an LLM, and that company is Mattel, and that customer or that category is Barbie, and they want to create a chatbot for Barbie fans, certain kinds of things aren't going to be allowed to be said in Barbie land. But if you are Grand Theft Auto, there's a whole different kind of dialogue that's going to happen in that community. And they should be able to do that because that's what that community is and that's what they expect. So guardrails may be too much of a cudgel or it's the wrong kind of tool because it's too broad. It may not have enough nuance in it to allow Barbie to be Barbie and, you know, Grand Theft Auto to be Grand Theft Auto. And so I think your point is well taken.
Great. So let's move on to everybody's favorite topic, regulations. Everybody's a big fan of regulations in this room. So there are plenty of new regulations coming into effect all throughout the globe. So no, I'm not going to summarize them or torture everybody here with things that aren't necessarily laws yet. But one of the interesting things that's coming out of these regulations is there are many requirements to do testing, right? Security testing and safety testing for things. So testing seems to be something that the security community does very well. I mean, we've been testing things for years. So, Nikki, what types of things, right, need to be tested for, whether it be regulatory or even internal guidance? Maybe you have your own policies internally. What are the sorts of things that need to be tested for? And what role do you see security professionals playing in AI safety here in the near future?
So regulations are kind of all over the place. And the one thing that I've observed, and I'm sorry if there are any regulators in this audience, is that we get laws that are drafted by people who don't necessarily understand how the technology works.
Yeah.
And so we end up with, like in Washington, D.C. a couple of years ago, they passed a law that said AI models, algorithms cannot be biased. So then there cannot be any AI in DC because there's not a way to make completely unbiased AI. I don't believe it's possible. But the regulations that focus on risk and the riskiness of an AI, and I think you mentioned it, the categories of harm, like this AI could be harmful. What's the likelihood that that harm is going to happen? And then start looking at how we regulate models based on what use case there is, what industry it's going to be used for, which groups of people are going to be using it and are going to be affected by it. And then consider the risk implications of that AI. As far as security or safety is concerned, I think when you start from that point, then you figure out what kinds of testing needs to be done. The executive order from the Biden administration from, I guess it was last fall, said you must red team your AI. Some AI, red teaming is just too much. Maybe all you need is penetration testing or something a little less involved than red teaming. And so even when the regulations say what kind of testing they do, I question whether they understand what it is that they're asking for. And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to educate about what kinds of testing is available out there and what testing makes sense for what situations, and then test appropriately.
Great. That's a great answer. Now you have to follow up. Miguel, anything to add to that?
I think maybe I'll just drill in very specifically because I think that's a really good broad framing. And I'll just pick on cyber because we're, Black Hat. So I think there's in the kind of AI space, there's been a long, decades worth of investment in like measuring how good these models are at different things. And historically, it was things like computer vision and kind of generally like language. But I think in the area of cyber, I've become much more convinced in the past couple of years. If you're interested, like there's like a recent blog post that we did with like the Project Zero folks from Google, and basically trying to assess how good are these models at a range of, in this case, like offensive cybersecurity capabilities, right? And they're getting pretty good at doing, certain things. And I think that there is still a bit of a gap in trying to ground that kind of understanding of how capable models are in the cyber domain, and coming up with, like, I think, better measures, metrics that are cross-industry, that at least we could kind of understand where we stand, is something that I think this community in particular could really weigh in on. So just kind of call for action and ideas, and excited to hear people's thoughts if you want to chat afterwards.
Great. Amanda, anything to add?
Yeah, so I've been on the AI Red Team for 3 years, so I was on it before the Gen AI boom and before the executive order, and so I've gotten to see the transition there. And I feel like, at least for us, in my experience of it, that Biden's executive order saying like all high risk or high impact Gen AI applications need to have independent red teaming, they kind of said that, and then we were able to implement it in a way that we thought from a technical perspective and a process perspective made sense. And it made it so instead of us testing deployed models and kind of giving guidance, we became part of the ship process, and we were able to give data that would help determine ship, no ship. And it gave some teeth to our work, and we were able to really say, no, these risks are not acceptable, and we're able to have that effect more. So I feel like sometimes the regulations can be helpful, but it's going to depend on how the company decides to, implement them, if they leave them broad enough, and I would prefer that they do, because if they try to specify the technical aspects, I don't think it tends to be quite correct. So, yeah.
Great. Couple more questions that we're hoping to get through today. So bear with us. So next question is, many organizations may be starting from scratch. So many organizations aren't as large as your organizations, obviously. So they may be struggling to find the right people to put in the right places. So what is some advice you could give for people starting with both AI safety and AI security? What are some first steps that they could take, and what can they do to get started? So, Mikhail?
Yeah, I mentioned earlier, I think that in my head, like a mental map is a bit of a kind of like a organizational readiness level for AI. And first of all, I think it's important to recognize that not every organization needs to use some state-of-the-art, massive model. I think it's important to ground this in terms of what you need. But I'm a huge fan of, this is nothing new, and this community has been doing this for forever, is I think that regular, at the minimum, having a mechanism to do kind of threat modeling, risk modeling. I think that's really a healthy place to know how you can allocate resources, because otherwise everything becomes kind of some hypothetical problem that you have to deal with, and you just don't have the time or resources for that. So at the minimum, I would recommend, if anything, getting enough to be able to kind of ground that understanding through some form of threat and risk modeling. And there's a lot of tools out there for that sort of thing. I guess I'll just shout out one that I'm a big fan of, because I was tangentially involved in helping put this together. Also with Microsoft, there's MITRE has similar to the attack framework, they have something for AI. It's called Atlas. I think it's a good starting point, but there's several other tools.
Great. Amanda, anything to add?
Sorry.
Getting started?
Getting
What
started.
can people do
Yes,
to get started?
Sorry. I just did a 4-day training that I taught, so my brain is dead right now. So I think getting started, a lot of times leadership starts to say, do we need AI red teaming because you have a model or you have an AI application that you want to release, and you're like, how do we assess that this isn't going to get us in trouble in some way or harm our end users in some way? And so even though we had an AI red team, when Bing Copilot was starting and things like that, we had 3 people, so it wasn't enough to do the level of testing that was needed. So very tactically, we got volunteers from across the company, and we had them do manual probing, and we did a little bit of training and gave examples and time boxed everyone, and then we collected the results and the impact and shared it widely, so people who participated felt that it was a valuable use of their time. And if you have to do that a couple times, then it starts to push for, we actually need dedicated resources for this, or we need to have people who at least have part-time on this so they can build their expertise and we can be more efficient and we can build up our data sets. So I think being able to do it that way, a lot of people are really interested in the manual probing aspect and just seeing what they can get these models to do, and that is how you start to evaluate the safety. And so I think that that can tend to be a good path of slowly like building up the case for we need this work, or finding out that actually that was enough and that's your main thing you're going to push out and you're just going to iterate on it and it's not going to be a big lift and you don't need a whole dedicated team.
Great. Nikki, anything to add?
No.
All right, well, great. That's easy. So another question here that people may be thinking about. So AI safety and even AI security, it's kind of an ever-evolving topic. And I think with safety, obviously, there's regulatory environments that aren't even set up yet. So with AI safety, where do you see things in like 3 to 5 years? So Amanda?
It's going to depend on, I think, what way we go with the models. Like, if we continue to just full steam ahead with LLMs as they are and try to just like push that, or if there are other types of these foundational, really powerful models that we end up finding are useful for some of these other tasks and we start to diversify. I think if we just like push LLMs and we start connecting them with all these data sources and giving them all these actions and power, like I don't think it's going to go great. I think that there are going to be more safety issues and it's going to sort of increase, and we might lose the ability to actually have any kind of control over what is being generated and how much of the internet is this generated content that is potentially unsafe. So I hope that we're able to push the science side and not let kind of the bottom line just make us go full steam ahead with this particular class of models.
Great. Nikki?
I don't want to predict the future. When I joined NVIDIA in 2020, there was no ChatGPT. I mean, maybe OpenAI had it, but nobody else knew about it. And I started my job by talking with engineers and research scientists and linguists and just learning the space and the products at the company. And then ChatGPT happened and everything changed and the world exploded and my job changed and focus changed and regulators went crazy and Congress is talking. I mean, it's just nuts. And so I don't know where it's going to be in 3 to 5 years. I know that I was not expecting to see avatars that speak in multiple languages. It's just, I don't know where it's going to go. I know it's not going to go to Cyberdyne yet, but I don't know where it's going to go. But I do agree with Amanda that we need to be very thoughtful about how we push these products out and how we distribute them and where we distribute them so that we can maintain enough control or oversight so that we can learn as we go as opposed to just throwing everything out there and hope for the best.
Nico?
I think that's super wise framing in the sense that I think we have to have a sense of humility here that even for those of us that, I mean, I've been in the AI space for over 20 years, and I didn't predict the past 2 years that happened, and I've been wrong multiple times. So every time I think I can kind of project out, I tend to get surprised. And I think Amanda's point about not over-indexing on transformers and kind of LLMs as the current paradigm, because that it just I think there's a lot of kind of racehorse options that are kind of brewing within the different AI labs right now, and we're exploring a whole bunch of other architectures. So, but that said, I guess the best we could do right now is take the current where are we making progress, and what does that look like a little bit? So kind of looking in the crystal ball. And for that, essentially, like right now, I think the best mental model that have seemed to start work that I think is useful for me at least is to, instead of thinking about these things as just kind of really smart chatbots, which is what I thought at first. I was like, okay, what's the big deal? This thing could talk to me. I think a better analogy that I've started to see used that could help you kind of see where this is going is to maybe start thinking about some of these models more almost like and this is something that this audience would get, is kind of more like almost like a kind of a kernel process in an emergent operating systems that's kind of made for solving problems. So if you think about it, these models have access to the internet, right? So that's kind of like Ethernet. They have peripheral devices. They could read and write I/O, right? They also have access to software 1.0 tools in the form of like calculators and code interpreters. And then, they also have access to other AI systems that they can interact with. So this kind of view of it as kind of like an emergent operating system can help you think about, okay, well, these are the type of problems we're going to be having to look at in the future. And it is concerning because, I mean, we've all seen how many, over decades of how hard it was to like get operating systems in a reasonable state, and we're just beginning with that in kind of the AI space. So again, I think this community in particular has a lot of the battle scars that I think can be ported over to like current AI kind of development. So I would encourage people, even though you might not be hunched over like training the next big model, I think you have a lot to say that we could probably learn from. So,
Well, great. We're about out of time. But since this panel is so great, we actually ended. I've never been part of a panel where people didn't talk too much until today, so thank you very much. This has been the easiest panel I've ever been a part of. So I guess from left to right, any final thoughts for the audience, anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to share before we part? Starting with you, Nikki.
One thing that I would, that I think we should all think about is privacy laws and how we comply with those privacy laws, but at the same time, when we were talking about protecting systems and cybersecurity, how do you balance the tension between, say, monitoring behavior to detect anomalies versus the privacy of the person who's using whatever the system is to not be monitored? And so I think privacy is going to play a really important role in how we go forward. And I think everybody in this audience would be good people to help us figure those problems out.
Great. Mikhail, anything that we didn't talk about that you'd like to share?
I think maybe just kind of I guess maybe, again, a call to action. I think, Amanda and I have similar roles in that a lot of what we're doing is trying to bring that kind of red teaming mindset to try to proactively identify things that could go wrong. And unfortunately, right now, you have like these different camps. You have like the AI people over here. You have the cyber folks doing things. And we want more opportunities to have like this kind of cross-pollination of things. So, so Nathan, I know you're involved in a lot of kind of efforts to do that at places like, Black Hat. So I would just say, I'm interested in, folks reaching out and hopefully having more events like this where we have that cross-pollination of folks and not these kind of disparate groups, because I think we could learn a lot from one another.
Amanda?
I would just say don't shy away from the safety piece, even if it hasn't been part of your training. I feel like I see that a lot. People coming from an offensive security background, and they're like, but I'm not trained to evaluate any of this. And like, yeah, none of us who are doing it really are, but someone has to do it, and it's important work. And the goal of security is to prevent financial harm and to not harm your end user, and safety has similar goals, and it's kind of all part and parcel with this AI red teaming work. So I would just say, like, be open, talk to people from different disciplines and backgrounds, and try to learn from each other, because we all need to work together to try to make this stuff a bit safer.
Well, great. Well, thank you very much for joining us today. We will be, rather than make you walk 20 miles to the speaker wrap room, we will be right outside answering some questions. So hopefully you will be able to join us for a little bit. So if you have additional questions for us, thank you very much. And for the AI content in Black Hat in general, I'm very easy to reach. If there's something you'd like to see more of, less of, whatever, please, by all means, reach out to me. I would very much welcome your feedback on that. So thank you very much. Thank you for sharing your information, and thank all of you for joining. And yeah, we will see you next time. So thank you very much.